Snow swirled across the open plain, whispering against the hard crust of frozen earth. The wind cut low and mean, pulling the last warmth from the day. Amos Ridge stood at the edge of the dry creek, his rifle steady in his hands, the bead of its barrel fixed on the broad chest of the stranger. The man's coat was torn, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hat pulled low. And then, soft as a moth's wing, Lark Winslow's voice broke through the stillness. "Don't shoot the stranger," she whispered, her breath a pale cloud in the cold. "Shoot me instead. I have nothing left." Her eyes were on him, not the man. There was no fear in them, no plea for mercy, just a hollow, steady resignation, like someone who'd already buried too much to care what happened next. Amos's finger hovered on the trigger, his breath stilled in his chest. The wind groaned through the cottonwoods, and somewhere far off, a lone coyote gave its sharp, mournful cry. But let's go back to where it all started. 3 weeks earlier, the land had still been dry and brittle underfoot, even though winter was coming on fast. Out past Sweetwater, the prairie rolled in long, golden swells, broken only by the dark green smudge of distant timber and the skeletal arms of wind-bent trees. The town was a crooked line of weather-worn buildings. Saloon, feed store, post, blacksmith. And it held onto life the way a cactus held onto water. Sparingly, carefully, without giving much away. Amos Ridge was no stranger there, but neither was he part of it. He lived alone, 30 miles west, where the grass thinned out to sand and sage. Folks said he liked it that way. He came into town for salt, cartridges, and coffee beans, and kept to himself otherwise. His eyes were the kind that had seen too much too young, gray and watchful under the brim of a sweat-stained hat. That day, the sun was dropping low, dragging the cold behind it. Amos was loading sacks of grain into his wagon when he caught a ripple of movement at the far end of the street. A girl, thin as fence wire, was picking her way along the boardwalk, her skirts torn and muddy. She carried nothing, and the way she held her arms tight against her sides told Amos more than her face did. Her hair was the pale brown of a wheat field left too long to dry, and her eyes were, well, they didn't seem to settle anywhere for long. She stepped into the alley beside the livery and didn't come out again. Amos didn't mean to follow, but when the sound of raised voices floated back, low, sharp, not meant for polite company, he found his boots carrying him that way. The alley smelled of hay dust and old manure. 2 men stood there, half hidden in the shadows, one of them with a hand clamped around the girl's wrist. The other was talking low and ugly, and though Amos couldn't hear every word, he heard enough. "Best be on your way, Ridge," the taller one said when he noticed him. "Ain't none of your business." Amos's jaw tightened. "Let her go." The shorter man laughed under his breath. "Ain't yours to say." The girl didn't move. Her eyes stayed down, her face still as stone. Amos shifted his rifle off his shoulder. He didn't point it, just let it rest in both hands the way a man might hold a thought he's willing to follow through on. "I reckon I just made it my business." The taller man studied him a moment, then let go of her wrist. You take her trouble too." She stepped back, but not toward Amos, just out of their reach. He didn't say another word until the men left, boots scraping on the frozen dirt. Only then did he look at her. "What's your name?" She hesitated long enough he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Lark. Got a place to be, Lark?" Her gaze met his for the first time, sharp and measuring, as if she were weighing him on some private scale. No, that was all she gave him, but it was enough for him to know she'd been without one for a while. 2 days later, Amos found her again. Not in town, but on the trail west of his place. She was walking, shoulders hunched against the wind. No coat, no gloves. There were bruises along her jaw that hadn't been there before. He pulled the wagon alongside her. "You're headed nowhere fast," he said. "I've been there before," she answered, voice flat. He studied the road ahead. "You can ride in the back. Just until dark." She climbed up without looking at him, and they rode in silence. That night, in the small warmth of his cabin, she ate stew like she hadn't had a meal in days. When she thanked him, it was barely audible, like she wasn't used to saying the word. Amos didn't press her for answers. He'd learned that in the West, some stories needed time before they could be told, if they were told at all. But he also knew something was coming. Men like the ones in that alley didn't let go easy. And folks who had nothing left, like Lark, had a way of standing in the path of trouble without even meaning to. 3 weeks later, he'd be standing in that frozen creek with his rifle leveled on a stranger, and Lark's voice would be breaking through the cold like a bell. "Don't shoot the stranger. Shoot me instead." And the worst part was, Amos didn't know yet which one would save her. The wind off the ridge smelled faintly of wood smoke, the kind that came from a far-off camp. Amos shifted his stance in the frozen creek, eyes on the stranger's hands, waiting for the smallest twitch. Lark's voice still hung in the air between them, strange and heavy, like it belonged to another world entirely. But this part of the story starts with the day Amos decided to keep her on. It had been a Wednesday, gray and slow, with clouds sagging low over the prairie. Lark had been in his cabin for 3 nights, sleeping in the small spare room where his mother's quilt still lay folded at the foot of the bed. She was careful, too careful, about how she moved around the place. She cleaned without being asked, cooked without looking at him, and spoke only when she had to. That morning, Amos had gone to check the fence line, leaving her with enough kindling and coffee to last the day. He came back to find her outside, feeding his mare sugar cubes like they were old friends. The mare, who barely tolerated strangers, stood calm under her touch. "You know horses," he said. She shrugged, brushing crumbs from her hands. "Knew one." Amos didn't ask more, but the way she spoke told him that the horse she knew was gone, and likely not in a gentle way. In town that Friday, Amos heard talk in the mercantile. 2 men leaning against the feed bins, voices low but pointed. "That Winslow girl's been seen out near Ridge's place," one said. "Ridge's?" The other gave a sharp laugh. "Either he's soft in the head, or he doesn't know what she's done." Amos kept his back to them, sorting through sacks of flour, but their voices carried easy in the still air. "You heard about the fire?" "Everyone's heard. Her father's place burnt to the ground. Man dead inside. Not just him. Brother too. And the girl walks away without a scratch? Folks say she lit it herself." The first man lowered his voice to a conspiratorial rasp. "Sheriff never proved it. But you know how that goes. Proof or no proof, some things stick." Amos didn't let on that he was listening. But when he left the store, his hands were tight on the reins, and the cold bit sharper than before. That evening, over stew, he watched her eat without looking up. "People in town are talking," he said. "They always are," she murmured. "They're saying there was a fire. That your kin?" "They weren't my kin," she cut in, sharp enough to surprise him. Her spoon stayed in the bowl, her eyes fixed on the rough wood of the table. "Not anymore." He waited, but she didn't explain further. Finally she added, "They can talk all they want. They don't know what it was like there." She rose to clear her bowl before he could answer. Amos leaned back in his chair, staring at the place she'd stood, the stew cooling in front of him. The first real trouble came 2 nights later. He heard the sound before he saw the glow, hoofbeats on hard ground, and the orange shimmer of lantern light moving fast up the trail to his cabin. By the time he stepped onto the porch with his rifle in hand, 3 riders had pulled up in a line, steam rising from their horses in the cold. The man in the middle was Orrin Pike, a rancher whose land ran along the creek a few miles east. His face was long, his eyes narrow, and his voice carried like a whip crack. "Evenin', Ridge," Pike said, not smiling. "We're looking for a girl." Amos said nothing. "She's got a knack for slipping away from trouble, but trouble always catches up." Pike's gaze shifted toward the cabin door. "And I hear she's been here." "You hear a lot," Amos said. Pike's jaw twitched. "Some things you don't want to get yourself tangled in. She was seen running from that fire. My cousin swore she was laughing when she did." Amos didn't move his rifle, but he felt the weight of Lark's presence inside, listening. "If you've got business with her, take it to the sheriff." Pike smirked. "Sheriff's a long ride, Ridge. Easier to settle it here." The two riders flanking him shifted in their saddles, eyes on Amos's hands. For a long moment, the cold wind was the only thing between them. Then Pike eased back on his reins. Think it over. You're either with the folks who keep order, or you're against them. They turned and rode off, lantern light bobbing into the dark. When Amos stepped back inside, Lark was by the fire, her arms wrapped tight around herself. They'll be back, she said quietly. I know, he answered. For the first time, she met his gaze and didn't look away. They're not wrong about the fire, she said. But they don't know why. The room went quiet again, save for the snap of the logs. And somewhere in Amos's gut, he felt the ground starting to shift. What he'd done tonight, standing in the doorway with his rifle between her and Pike, wasn't something he could take back. It was a decision, even if he hadn't meant it to be. One that would soon leave him standing in that frozen creek, a stranger on the far side of his barrel, and Lark offering her life instead of his. The days that followed were colder, both in the weather and in the way the world seemed to be looking at Amos Ridge. On Saturday, he rode into Sweetwater for supplies. The air was brittle, the kind of cold that chewed through a man's coat and stung his cheeks. He noticed the shift before he'd even hitched his horse, how the few men outside the saloon stopped talking when they saw him, how a woman coming out of the mercantile looked away quick and hurried down the boardwalk. Inside, the clerk gave a stiff nod. Morning, Ridge. Morning, Amos said, setting a list on the counter. He could feel the weight of eyes through the shop window. Two cowhands leaned on the hitch rail, pretending not to watch him. While the clerk filled his order, Sheriff Merrick stepped in from the cold. The sheriff was a broad man with a beard gone mostly white and the patience of someone who'd spent half his life breaking up fights between neighbors who'd known each other since birth. Amos, Merrick said slowly, I've been hearing things. Amos kept his voice even. I expect you have. Folks say Pike came out to see you the other night. That true? True enough. And the girl's still with you? She is. Merrick's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in that way a man looks when he's turning over a problem in his mind. I'm not telling you what to do, Ridge, but I've seen trouble take root quick out here. Pike's got friends. Friends who don't need much reason to ride hard in the dark. I'll keep that in mind. The sheriff left it there, but Amos knew the talk wouldn't stop. Not with Pike fanning the flames. That night, a red glow flickered on the horizon, far off but steady. Amos saw it from his porch, the wind pushing the smell of smoke through the sage. He knew it wasn't lightning. Lark stepped outside, pulling his coat tighter around her shoulders. It's them, she said. He didn't ask how she knew. They want to flush me out. Make you choose. Her voice was quiet but not afraid. More like she'd accepted the idea a long time ago. Why don't you tell me the whole of it? Amos said. The fire. Your kin. Pike. She stared at the smoke for a while before answering. My father wasn't the man people thought. And my brother, he was worse. I tried to leave more times than I can count. But every time I did, they'd drag me back. Her hands curled into fists inside the coat. That night, my father was drunk and my brother was mean. I'd hidden in the barn. The lamp tipped. I didn't put it out. Amos waited. They were inside when the fire caught. I didn't go back for them. Could've. But I didn't. Her voice had no tremor, no apology. Just the flat sound of truth. The smoke on the horizon thinned, fading into the black. Inside, Amos banked the fire low. He didn't say whether he believed her. 3 days later, trouble came in the daylight. Amos was chopping wood out back when he heard it, the steady thud of hooves in unison. He set the axe aside and walked to the front of the cabin. 6 riders this time. Pike was at the front, grinning like he'd already won something. Afternoon, Ridge, Pike called. We're here for the girl. She's not yours to take, Amos said. She's not yours to keep, Pike shot back. You think you're her savior, but you're just buying yourself a heap of grief. She's got blood on her hands, and it's not the kind you wash off. The men behind him shifted, their rifles slung loose. Amos didn't raise his own gun, but his voice had an edge. If you're looking for justice, you're facing the wrong door. You want revenge, you'll have to earn it. Pike's grin faded. Careful, Ridge. You're outnumbered, and no one in town will weep for you. A silence stretched. Even the horses seemed to hold still. Finally Pike spat in the dirt. You've got till the next moon to send her out. After that, we'll come take her. They turned as one and rode off, snow kicking up in their wake. Lark had been watching from the window. When Amos came inside, she asked, You believe them? I believe they mean what they say, he replied. Her eyes searched his face. You could have handed me over just now. I could have, Amos said. Neither of them said the rest, that if Pike came back it wouldn't be for a talk, and that the choice Amos had made was one he'd have to stand in, even if it killed them both. Somewhere deep down, Amos knew this road ended with that stranger in the frozen creek, and Lark's voice offering her life in place of another's. The days crawled by, each one tight with the kind of quiet that isn't peace, just the breath before a storm. The wind shifted east, carrying with it a sky the color of lead. Amos worked the stockade fence that morning, mending a post splintered by age and winter. Lark was by the corral, brushing down the mare with slow, even strokes. They didn't talk much anymore. Not from anger, just the weight of what hung between them. They both knew Pike's time limit was drawing close. Around midday, a sound came from far off. Not the easy lope of a rancher's ride or the staggered pace of a trader's wagon. This was steady, deliberate, and many. Amos stopped, the hammer in his hand gone still. He looked up at the horizon. Riders. A dark line against the pale sweep of snow, moving as one. The distance made them seem small, but there was nothing small about the way they approached. Lark came up beside him. It's not Pike. Amos didn't answer. He could see the difference too. These men rode low in the saddle, their horses lean and swift. There was no wasted motion. Whoever they were, they'd come with a purpose. By the time they were close enough to make out faces, Amos counted 10. The one in front was young but carried himself like he owned the space between earth and sky. His coat was trimmed with dark fur, his rifle laid casually across his lap. They reined up 20 yards from the porch. The leader's eyes swept over Amos, then to Lark, then back to Amos again. You Amos Ridge? I am. The young man's voice was calm, each word measured. Name's Levi Crane. My brother passed through here 2 days ago. He never made it home. Amos kept his stance easy. I haven't seen your brother. Levi's gaze lingered on Lark. Maybe she has. Lark stiffened, but Amos spoke before she could. She hasn't either. Levi's jaw flexed just slightly. Word in town says you're harboring someone who brings trouble wherever she stays. My brother had a knack for finding that kind of trouble. What exactly are you asking? Amos said. I'm not asking. Levi's tone didn't sharpen, but the men behind him shifted their weight, hands resting on rifle butts. If you know where he is, you'll tell me. If something happened to him, you'll say it now so we can deal with it like men. Amos let the silence stretch. The wind cut between them, whistling low through the cottonwoods. Finally, Amos said, Your quarrel's not with her, and it's not with me. Levi studied him a moment longer, then leaned forward in his saddle. Everything's a quarrel when a man's kin is missing. He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following in a dark, silent wave. They didn't look back. Lark let out a breath she'd been holding. He thinks I had something to do with it. They all do, Amos said. Do you? Amos looked at her then, really looked, at the weariness in her shoulders, the set of her mouth, the way her eyes had learned to guard themselves. If I did, you wouldn't be standing here. Her gaze softened just enough for something like relief to flicker through. That night, Amos sat at the table, cleaning his rifle. The fire snapped in the hearth, the only light in the room. I've been thinking, Lark said from the doorway. Maybe I should go. Pike, Levi, they're not gonna stop. Not while I'm here. Amos didn't look up from the rifle. If you go, they'll hunt you alone. You won't last a day. She stepped closer. And if I stay, they'll come here. You'll get killed over something that's not even yours to carry. He set the rifle down, the soft click of metal on wood loud in the quiet. It became mine the moment I told Pike no. They stared at each other across the dim light. Neither spoke again. Outside, the night had gone too still. No wind, no coyotes, nothing. Then, faint but certain, came the sound of hoofbeats. Slow, heavy, getting closer. Amos rose, the rifle in his hands before the chair even stopped rocking. Lark's eyes were wide now, but her voice was steady. It's starting. He nodded once. Somewhere in his gut, Amos knew this wouldn't be Pike or Levi. Whoever was coming was a different kind of danger entirely. The kind that would end with him in that frozen creek, and her whispering for him to shoot her instead. Snow had fallen in the night, muting the world into a cold, endless white. Amos's breath puffed in the still air, each exhale loud in the silence. The stranger across the frozen creek stood motionless, one gloved hand resting near the butt of his revolver. The man was tall, lean, his coat dusted with frost, eyes pale as winter sky. Amos had never seen him before, yet the stranger's gaze carried something familiar, like a shadow from a story Lark had never told in full. Behind Amos, Lark's boots crunched faintly on the snow. He didn't have to turn to know she was there. "Don't shoot the stranger," she whispered, her voice raw in the cold. "Shoot me instead. I have nothing left." It was not the sound of someone bargaining for mercy. It was the sound of someone finished with running. The stranger's eyes shifted past Amos, landing on her. His mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite, but a flicker of something unreadable. "You're far from where you belong, Lark," he said. His voice was quiet, deep, carrying easily in the frozen air. Amos didn't lower his rifle. "She belongs where she's safe." The man tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Safe isn't something she's owed. Not after Levi." Lark's breath hitched. "Levi followed me. She stopped herself, eyes darting away. "He wouldn't let me leave." "Amos, I didn't mean to." The stranger cut in. "Levi Crane was my brother." The words hung between them, heavy and unmoving. Amos tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then I'm guessing you're here to finish what Pike started." The man shook his head once. "No, I came to hear it from her. And I have." Lark stepped forward, the snow sighing under her weight. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady now. "Your brother meant to drag me back to Pike. I warned him I wouldn't go. He didn't listen. He came at me in the dark, and She swallowed hard. "It was him or me." The stranger's gaze didn't soften, but he didn't move for his gun either. "Then I reckon you've already carried your punishment longer than I could make it last." Amos's rifle wavered, just slightly. "That it? You ride all this way just to let it go?" The man's pale eyes met his. "Some debts get settled without blood. Sometimes the living pay more than the dead ever could." He turned his horse without another word, riding back into the white silence. The sound of hoofbeats faded until only the whisper of the wind remained. Lark stood rooted, her breath shaking now that it was over. Amos lowered the rifle, the weight of it suddenly heavier than any fight. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "I didn't know if you'd still keep me here," she answered. He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her the rifle. "Then I guess you'll just have to stay and find out." They walked back toward the cabin together, the snow swallowing their tracks almost as fast as they made them. By nightfall, the wind would cover every sign of the stranger's visit. Pike might still come. Others might too. But for now, the prairie was still, and the fire inside Amos Ridge's cabin burned warm against the cold. And somewhere deep in that quiet, Lark Winslow began to believe, just a little, that she might have something left after all.